I'm Sarah Matthews, and I'm 28. 3 days ago, my brother Marcus called me screaming. He'd just opened his mailbox and discovered what I'd been planning for months. His wedding invitation was nowhere to be found. Neither was Jessica's. Or David's. "You cannot be serious," he spat into the phone, his voice shaking with disbelief. "After everything, you're really going to exclude your own family from your wedding?" I leaned back in my office chair, surrounded by vendor contracts for my upcoming celebration, and delivered the line I'd been rehearsing. I learned exclusion from the best teachers. The silence that followed was absolutely perfect. But here's the thing about family dynamics. They don't happen overnight. This story doesn't start with my wedding planning. It starts 3 years ago, when I learned that my own siblings considered me too problematic to witness their happiness. When they looked me in the eye and decided I wasn't family enough for their most important days. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt excluded by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to where this all began. I was 25, working as an assistant at a small event planning company called Celebrations Inc. My boss, Linda, was kind but overworked, and I spent most days coordinating vendor deliveries and managing client phone calls. I lived in a studio apartment with a Murphy bed and a kitchen the size of a closet, but I was proud of my independence. My family dynamic was complicated. I was the middle child between Marcus, who was 31 then, and David, who was 26. Jessica, 29, had always been the golden child. Successful, beautiful, confident in ways I'd never quite managed. Growing up, she'd been everything our parents wanted in a daughter. Agreeable, popular, destined for success. I was different. I asked questions when things didn't seem fair. I pointed out inconsistencies in family rules. I noticed when I was treated differently and had the audacity to mention it. This apparently made me difficult and dramatic, according to family consensus. The first blow came on a Tuesday evening during what should have been a celebration dinner. Marcus had just announced his engagement to Victoria, his college sweetheart, and we were all gathered at our parents' house for the big news. Everyone was excited, champagne was flowing, and I was genuinely happy for my brother. "We're thinking a small ceremony," Marcus said, his arm around Victoria. "Just immediate family and close friends. Maybe 60 people total." "That sounds perfect," I said, already thinking about what dress I'd wear. "What can I do to help?" The table went quiet in that particular way that signals an uncomfortable topic approaching. My parents exchanged a look I knew well. The look that meant they were about to deliver news that would hurt my feelings while pretending it was reasonable. "Sarah, honey," my mother began, using that patronizing tone I'd heard my entire life. "When Marcus says, 'immediate family,' well, we think it would be better if you didn't come," Marcus finished, still not meeting my eyes. "Victoria and I want a completely peaceful day. No complications, no drama, no tension." I felt like I'd been slapped. What tension? What drama? When have I ever caused drama at a family event? "Christmas 2018, Jessica said immediately, "when you made that scene about the gift exchange." The scene. I'd pointed out that everyone else got thoughtful presents while I received gift cards to Target. I'd asked quietly if we could maybe set spending limits so things felt more equitable. Apparently, advocating for fair treatment constituted making a scene. "Your graduation party," David added, "when you got upset about the seating arrangement." The seating arrangement where I'd been placed at the kids' table despite being 23 and having just earned my degree. When I'd asked to move to the adult table, I was told I was being oversensitive. The family reunion, my father contributed. All that business about the photo arrangements. The photo arrangements where I'd been consistently placed in the back row or cropped out entirely, while my siblings were front and center in every shot that would be framed or shared. As they listed my crimes, a pattern emerged that I'd been too close to see clearly. Every instance of me causing drama was actually me pointing out unfair treatment and asking to be included equally. Every time I'd advocated for myself, it had been reframed as me being difficult. "I just want my wedding day to be perfect," Marcus said, as if that explained everything. "And you always find something to complain about." That night, I went home to my tiny apartment and cried until my eyes were swollen shut. Then I got angry. Then, for the first time in my life, I got determined to change something fundamental about how I allowed myself to be treated. The days following Marcus's announcement were a blur of hurt and confusion. I kept replaying the conversation, searching for clues I'd missed, trying to understand how wanting to be treated fairly had somehow made me the family villain. But the more I thought about it, the more patterns began emerging from my childhood. I remembered being 12 and asking why Marcus got a bigger allowance for doing fewer chores. "You're being jealous," my mother had said. "That's not attractive in a young lady." When I was 14 and pointed out that Jessica was allowed to stay out later despite being only 2 years older, I was told I was keeping score and making everything a competition. When I questioned why David got a car for his 16th birthday when I'd been told to save my babysitting money for my own, I was accused of being ungrateful for what we do provide. Every time I'd noticed unfair treatment, I'd been gaslit into believing the problem was my perception, not their behavior. Every time I'd asked for equal treatment, I'd been told I was being difficult. My family had trained me to believe that advocating for myself was the same as causing problems. But here's what I was finally starting to understand. A family that punishes you for noticing unfair treatment isn't actually interested in treating you fairly. They're interested in you accepting unfair treatment quietly. I called in sick to work and spent the day walking around the city, processing this revelation. By evening, I'd made a decision that would change everything. I was going to stop trying to earn my place in their lives and start building a life where I was actually wanted. The next morning, I threw myself into work with a focus I'd never had before. Linda noticed immediately. "You seem different," she said after I'd successfully coordinated 3 vendor meetings and resolved a client crisis before noon. More confident, I guess. She was right. When you stop wasting energy trying to convince people to treat you well, you have a lot more energy for everything else. I started staying late to learn new aspects of the business. I shadowed Linda during client meetings, took notes on her techniques, and began building relationships with vendors. 2 weeks later, Jessica called. For a moment, my heart jumped. Maybe she was going to tell me Marcus had changed his mind, that the whole thing had been a mistake. Instead, she said, "Brad and I are planning our engagement party, and we've decided to have it the same weekend as your birthday." My birthday. The one day of the year that was supposed to be mine. "That seems like unfortunate timing," I said carefully, testing whether this was intentional. "Well, it's the only weekend that works for Brad's family," she said breezily. "And honestly, Sarah, you never do anything special for your birthday anyway. You'll understand." There it was. The assumption that my life, my feelings, my special day could be moved aside for their convenience. The expectation that I would understand, accommodate, and disappear quietly like I always had. But something had changed in me since Marcus's wedding announcement. Something fundamental had shifted in how I was willing to be treated. "Actually," I heard myself saying, "I'm planning something special this year. Something I've been looking forward to for months." It was a complete lie. I hadn't been planning anything. But something inside me had snapped. Some long-dormant sense of self-worth that refused to be steamrolled again. "Oh," Jessica sounded genuinely surprised. She'd expected me to fold immediately. "Well, I'm sure whatever it is can be rescheduled. This engagement party is really important, and Brad's grandmother is flying in from Florida specifically for this date. My birthday can't be rescheduled." "Jess, it's been the same day for 25 years. Sarah, don't be difficult about this. Family comes first." "Does it?" I asked, because I'm not feeling very prioritized right now. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Jessica had expected automatic compliance. The idea that I might choose myself over her convenience had literally never occurred to her. "Fine," she said finally, her voice tight with irritation. "Have your little party. We'll send you pictures from the engagement celebration." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone. For the first time in my adult life, I'd chosen myself over my siblings' convenience. It felt terrifying and exhilarating simultaneously. That weekend, I threw myself a birthday party. Nothing elaborate. Dinner with my work friends at a nice restaurant, followed by drinks at a local bar with live music. But as I looked around the table at people who actually wanted to celebrate with me, who laughed at my jokes and listened to my stories with genuine interest, I realized something profound. This was what it felt like to be valued. This was what it felt like to matter to people. And once you experience that feeling, it becomes very hard to accept less. Marcus's wedding was everything he'd dreamed of, apparently. I know because the photos flooded social media for weeks afterward. Beautiful outdoor ceremony, gorgeous flowers, beaming family members surrounding the happy couple. Everyone who mattered was there, celebrating love and new beginnings. I wasn't there. Instead, I spent that Saturday working on what would become the biggest break of my career. A client had approached Celebrations Inc. about organizing a corporate retreat for a pharmaceutical company, something way beyond our usual scope of birthday parties and small weddings. Linda wanted to turn it down, but I convinced her to let me handle it. "What's the worst that could happen?" I'd argued. "If I mess it up, we're no worse off than if we'd said no from the beginning." While my brother exchanged vows with Victoria, I was coordinating catering for 200 executives, managing transportation logistics, and ensuring the retreat center had everything needed for a successful 3-day event. The work was challenging in ways that energized rather than exhausted me. The retreat was a massive success. The pharmaceutical company was so impressed they referred us to 3 other corporations, and suddenly I was the go-to person for high-end corporate events. Linda gave me a raise, a new title, and significantly more responsibility. For the first time since college, I felt like I was building something meaningful instead of just surviving paycheck to paycheck. But the real test of my new mindset came 6 months later. During a family dinner I'd been surprised to be invited to. We were sitting around the table at my parents' house making small talk about work and weather when Jessica made her announcement. "Brad and I have set our wedding date," she said, practically glowing with excitement. "Next March, we're planning a beautiful ceremony. Just immediate family and close friends." I didn't even look up from cutting my food. "That sounds lovely. I hope you have perfect weather. It's going to be at the Botanical Gardens," she continued, clearly expecting more enthusiastic engagement. "Very elegant, very intimate, maybe 40 people total." "Intimate," I repeated neutrally. "How nice." There was something in my tone that made the table go quiet. Jessica was studying my face, probably trying to figure out why I wasn't asking about bridesmaid dresses or offering to help with planning. "You could help with some of the setup if you want," she said finally, as if throwing me a bone. "Since you're in the event business now, maybe coordinate some of the vendor deliveries or something." The condescension in her voice made my jaw clench. She was offering to let me work her wedding after making it clear I wouldn't be attending as a guest. She expected me to provide free labor for an event I was excluded from. "I'll be busy that weekend," I said simply. "Doing what?" "Working. I have a client event that weekend." It was true. I'd just booked a luxury wedding for the same weekend, and the deposit alone was more than I used to make in 2 months. "Surely you can reschedule for family," my mother interjected, using that tone that had always made me feel guilty before. "Family always comes first." I set down my fork and looked directly at her. "Does it, Mom? Because when I wanted to be family at Marcus's wedding, I was told I'd complicate things. Now I'm family when you need free labor, but not family when it comes to celebrating together?" The table went dead silent. David looked uncomfortable. My father focused intently on his food. Jessica's face flushed red. "That's completely different," she said. "How?" "You know how." "Actually, I don't." "Explain to me how it's different." She couldn't. None of them could. They'd created a system where I was family when they needed something from me, but not family when it came to including me in their joy. They expected unconditional support while providing conditional acceptance. "I think," I said, standing up and gathering my purse, "I'll skip the rest of dinner. I have client calls to make." As I headed for the door, Jessica called after me. "You're really going to choose work over family?" I turned back to look at her. This sister who had consistently chosen her convenience over our relationship, her comfort over my feelings, her priorities over mine. "I'm choosing people who actually want me there," I said quietly. "There's a difference. Have you ever experienced that moment when you finally stop accepting less than you deserve? When you realize that the people who claim to love you should actually act like they like you too? Share your story in the comments below, because what happened next changed everything. The year following Jessica's wedding announcement became a period of unprecedented personal growth. Without the emotional drain of constantly trying to prove my worth to my family, I discovered I had enormous reserves of energy for building the life I actually wanted. My professional reputation in corporate event planning began growing rapidly. The pharmaceutical retreat had showcased my ability to manage complex logistics under pressure, and word spread through Chicago's business community. I started getting calls from Fortune 500 companies, nonprofit organizations, and high-end wedding planners who needed someone reliable for their most challenging events. Linda, who had originally been hesitant about expanding beyond our traditional scope, became my biggest advocate. "Whatever shift happened in you this year," she said, after I successfully managed a 3-day conference for an international tech company, "it's been incredible to watch. You have a confidence now that clients immediately trust." She was absolutely right. When you stop questioning your basic worth, you can focus entirely on demonstrating your competence. When you're not constantly trying to manage other people's comfort with your existence, you can channel that energy into excelling at what you do. I moved out of my studio apartment into a 1-bedroom in Lincoln Park. I bought a reliable car that didn't require weekly mechanic visits. I started taking evening classes in advanced event management and luxury hospitality. Most importantly, I began saying yes to social invitations from colleagues and clients. building a network of professional relationships that felt genuinely supportive. That's how I met Daniel. He was the keynote speaker at a charity gala I was coordinating for a children's hospital. Dr. Daniel Chen, a pediatric surgeon who had pioneered a new technique for treating congenital heart defects. He was scheduled to speak about the intersection of medical innovation and community support. I was doing my final walkthrough of the ballroom when he approached me during the cocktail hour. "Are you Sarah Matthews?" he asked, extending his hand. "I wanted to thank you personally for the coordination of tonight. The way you've managed to make this hotel ballroom feel warm and intimate while accommodating 300 guests is remarkable." "Thank you," I said, genuinely surprised by the specific compliment. Most people just said nice job without really understanding what went into creating the atmosphere. "I have to ask," he continued, "would you be available for private events? My hospital is planning a fundraising gala next year, and after seeing your work tonight, I'd love to discuss having you coordinate it." That conversation led to coffee the following week to discuss the hospital gala. Coffee led to dinner to continue planning conversations. Dinner led to the realization that we both enjoyed long walks along Lake Michigan and had strong opinions about the best deep dish pizza in Chicago. Daniel was different from any man I'd dated before. He was successful without being arrogant, confident without being controlling. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, my goals, my opinions on everything from architecture to social justice. Most importantly, he seemed genuinely interested in my answers. 3 months into our relationship, he met my family situation head-on. "You don't talk about your siblings much," he observed one evening over dinner. "Are you close with them?" "It's complicated," I said, falling back on the explanation I'd used for years. "How complicated?" I found myself telling him about Marcus's wedding exclusion, Jessica's engagement party scheduling, the pattern of being included only when they needed something from me. I expected him to suggest I was overreacting, or that family relationships required more patience and understanding. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That sounds exhausting. Having to constantly prove you deserve basic consideration from people who are supposed to love you unconditionally." His simple validation meant more than years of therapy might have. He didn't try to fix my family relationships or convince me to be more understanding. He just acknowledged that their behavior was problematic and that my feelings about it were reasonable. "You know what I've noticed?" he said as we walked home that night. "When you talk about your work, your face lights up. You get animated and passionate. When you talk about your family, you look tired, like you're carrying something heavy." He was right. I hadn't realized how much emotional energy I'd been spending on managing family dynamics until I started redirecting that energy toward people who actually appreciated it. The validation of being in a healthy relationship began highlighting just how dysfunctional my family dynamics had always been. Daniel's family welcomed me warmly from our first meeting. They asked genuine questions about my work, remembered details from previous conversations, and included me naturally in their gatherings. The contrast was startling. "Your girlfriend is delightful," Daniel's mother, Patricia, told him after a Sunday dinner where I'd helped with cleanup without being asked. "She's got such interesting stories about her work, and she actually listens when other people are talking. That's rarer than it should be." Being around the Chen family showed me what functional family dynamics looked like. They disagreed sometimes, but respectfully. They teased each other, but without cruelty. They celebrated each other's successes genuinely, without competition or resentment. Most importantly, they seemed to actually enjoy spending time together. Meanwhile, my own family continued operating exactly as they always had. David announced his engagement 6 months after Jessica's wedding, and I knew immediately what was coming. "Sarah," he said when he called, his voice carrying that particular tone my siblings used when they were about to deliver disappointing news while pretending to be reasonable. "Rachel and I have set our wedding date, and I wanted to talk to you before you heard it from Mom and Dad." "Let me guess," I said, not looking up from the vendor contracts I was reviewing for an upcoming corporate anniversary celebration. "Small ceremony, immediate family only, and I'm not immediate enough." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Look," he finally said, "it's not about you personally. It's about keeping things simple, avoiding any potential drama," I finished for him. "Complications, tension. Yes, I've heard this before." "You know it's not about your worth as a person," David said, but his voice lacked conviction even as he said it. "Isn't it, though?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Because if 3 siblings independently decide that the same sister's presence would ruin their most important day, what conclusion should that sister draw about how her family sees her? It's not like that. It's exactly like that, David. You've all decided that I'm fundamentally incompatible with your happiness. That my very existence creates problems that need to be managed rather than embraced. I could hear him sigh heavily. Fine, have it your way. I will, I said, and meant it more than I'd ever meant anything. After hanging up, I felt something I had never experienced after these conversations before. Complete peace. Not devastation, not desperate disappointment, not frantic mental calculations about what I could change to earn their acceptance. Just calm certainty that I understood exactly where I stood and could plan my life accordingly. That weekend, Daniel and I went house hunting. We'd been talking about moving in together, and my family's latest confirmation of their priorities had clarified something important for me. I was ready to build my own traditions with someone who chose me consistently. We found a beautiful townhouse in Andersonville with hardwood floors, a renovated kitchen, and a small garden where we could grow herbs and vegetables. As we walked through the rooms, I could picture our future there. Dinner parties with friends who enjoyed our company. Holiday celebrations where everyone was genuinely welcome. A life built on mutual respect and authentic affection. This feels right, Daniel said, wrapping his arms around me in the empty living room that would soon be filled with furniture we chose together. It really does, I agreed, leaning back against his chest. 6 months later, he proposed in that same living room, now furnished with a comfortable sofa and bookshelves we'd assembled together. It wasn't elaborate or orchestrated, just honest and perfect and exactly right for who we were as a couple. Sarah, he said, dropping to one knee between our coffee table and the window where morning light streamed in, I love how strong you are. I love how you've learned to value yourself the way you deserve to be valued. I love that you refuse to settle for relationships that don't feed your soul. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life showing you what it feels like to be someone's first choice every single day? Through tears of pure joy, I said yes. And for the first time in my life, I felt like the most important person in someone's universe. Not because I'd earned it through perfect behavior or endless accommodation, but simply because he saw my worth and celebrated it. Planning our wedding became the professional and personal challenge of my lifetime. Daniel and I wanted something elegant but authentic, meaningful but not pretentious. After extensive research, we chose Ravenswood Manor, a restored Victorian mansion with gardens that would be perfect for an outdoor ceremony followed by indoor reception. Creating our guest list felt like the most honest exercise I'd ever undertaken. Daniel's extended family, who had embraced me completely, our mutual friends from work and social circles, colleagues who had become genuine companions, my college roommates who had watched my transformation with pride and excitement, extended family members, aunts, uncles, and cousins who had always treated me with basic kindness, despite the drama with my immediate family. And then came the question I'd been avoiding: what to do about Marcus, Jessica, and David. You have to invite them, my mother said during one of her increasingly frequent phone calls about wedding details. What will people think when your own siblings aren't at your wedding? People will ask questions. Let them ask, I replied, addressing invitations at our dining room table. I'm not planning my wedding around managing other people's opinions. Sarah, be reasonable. Whatever issues you think you have with your brothers and sister, your wedding day should be about forgiveness and bringing family together. I set down my calligraphy pen and took a deep breath. Mom, they've made it very clear through their actions that I'm not part of their family celebrations. Why would I include them in mine? That's completely different. How is it different? Use your words, Mom. Explain the difference to me. The question hung in the air between us, just as it had every time I'd asked it over the past 3 years. I'd been asking for specific explanations for their behavior for years and had never received one that made logical sense. It just is, she said finally, falling back on the non-explanation that had frustrated me my entire life. You're the bride. You should be the bigger person here. The bigger person. I'd heard that phrase countless times growing up. Be the bigger person when Marcus got the larger bedroom because he was older. Be the bigger person when Jessica got the car that had been promised to me because she needed it more. Be the bigger person when David got financial support for college while I worked 3 jobs to pay my own way. I've been the bigger person for 28 years, Mom. I'm done. After I hung up, I stared at the 3 wedding invitations I'd prepared for my siblings. Beautiful ivory cardstock with elegant gold lettering, exactly like all the others. Inside, the same warm invitation to celebrate our love and witness our commitment to building a life together. Daniel found me sitting there an hour later, still staring at those 3 envelopes. Second thoughts? He asked, settling beside me at the table. I keep thinking about what it means, I said slowly. If I don't send these, it's final. It's me officially acknowledging that we don't have functional relationships and I'm done trying to create them. And if you do send them? I considered his question seriously. If I send them, I'm telling them that nothing they've done matters, that they can exclude me from their most important days and still expect to be included in mine, that there are no consequences for treating me as optional. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. What does your instinct tell you? My instinct told me that my siblings had made their choice repeatedly over several years. They'd had multiple opportunities to include me, to treat me as valuable, to demonstrate that they wanted me in their lives. Instead, they'd consistently chosen their own comfort over my feelings, their convenience over our relationships. It was time for me to make my choice. I gathered the 3 invitations and walked to the kitchen, where I dropped them in the recycling bin. The sound they made hitting the bottom was final and surprisingly satisfying. No going back now, Daniel observed quietly. Good, I said, surprised by how much I meant it. The invitations we did mail out were received with enthusiasm and genuine excitement. Our friends couldn't wait to celebrate with us. Daniel's family called to offer assistance with planning details. My extended relatives sent warm notes expressing their joy for my happiness and their admiration for the life I'd built. But I knew the real test was coming. My siblings were about to discover that their little sister had finally learned to exclude them right back. And based on their past behavior, I was certain they wouldn't handle that revelation gracefully. What I couldn't have predicted was just how far they'd be willing to go to try to force their way back into my life, or how strong I'd become in protecting the peace I'd worked so hard to create. The phone calls started exactly 3 days after the invitations were delivered. Marcus was first, and his voice carried that particular combination of disbelief and indignation I'd heard whenever his expectations weren't met. Sarah, I think there's been some kind of mistake with the mail service, he said without preamble. Victoria and I never received our wedding invitation. I was in my office at Celebrations Inc., reviewing final details for a corporate merger celebration. The irony of planning a joyful event while having this conversation wasn't lost on me. There was no mistake, I said calmly, making notes about floral arrangements. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear him breathing. Sarah, he said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger, you cannot be serious about this. I'm completely serious. But we're your family. We're your brothers and sister. Those words, the same words they dismissed when I'd wanted to be included in their celebrations, hung between us now, loaded with years of contradiction and hypocrisy. Are we family, Marcus? Because when I wanted to witness your happiness, you told me I was a complication that needed to be managed. When I wanted to celebrate Jessica's love story, I was told I'd create drama. When I wanted to support David's new beginning, I apparently wasn't immediate enough family to qualify. Those situations were different. How? I interrupted. The same question I'd been asking for years. How are those situations different from this one? Use specific words, Marcus. Explain to me how excluding me from your wedding was different from me excluding you from mine. Another long silence. I could practically hear him scrambling for an explanation that would make sense, some logical distinction that would justify their behavior while condemning mine. We were trying to avoid potential conflict, he said eventually. Congratulations, I replied smoothly. Mission accomplished. No potential conflict at my wedding either. This is ridiculous. Sarah, you're our sister, and you're my brothers. But somehow that wasn't enough to earn me a place at your celebrations. Why should it be enough to earn you places at mine? I heard him take a sharp breath, probably realizing that I was applying their exact logic back to them. We can work something out, he said, his tone shifting toward negotiation. We can talk through whatever issues you think. Actually, we can't. I cut him off, returning my attention to the vendor contracts on my desk. My venue has limited capacity, and I've invited people who actually want to celebrate with me. There's simply no room for anyone who considers my presence optional in their lives. After I hung up, something interesting happened. Instead of the guilt, anxiety, and desperate need to fix things that had always followed confrontations with my family, I felt nothing. Just calm certainty that I'd handled the situation exactly as it needed to be handled. 2 hours later, Jessica called. Her approach was more strategic, more emotionally manipulative. Sarah, honey, she began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I think there might have been some confusion about the wedding invitations. I know you're upset about the past, but surely we can move beyond all that now. There's no confusion, Jessica, just consequences. Look, I understand you felt hurt by our wedding decisions, but this is your wedding. It's supposed to be about love and forgiveness and bringing families together in celebration. I almost laughed at the selective philosophy. Really? Because your wedding was about keeping family apart. David's too. Marcus's as well. But now that it's my turn, suddenly weddings are about bringing everyone together? Don't be petty, Sarah. Petty. the word they'd always used when I dared to stand up for myself, when I refused to accept poor treatment without complaint. You know what's actually petty, Jessica? Uninviting your sister from your wedding because you've decided her personality is incompatible with your happiness. You know what else is petty? Scheduling your engagement party on my birthday because you knew I wouldn't fight you on the date. This isn't petty. This is accountability. But we're family, she said, falling back on the refrain that had lost all meaning. No, Jessica. Family doesn't systematically exclude each other from life's most important moments. Family doesn't treat each other as problems to be managed rather than people to be celebrated. You taught me that I'm not your family. I'm just finally accepting the lesson. The conversations with David followed the same pattern, but his strategy was pure emotional manipulation. Mom has been crying for days, he said without any greeting when I answered his call. Dad doesn't understand how his only daughter could exclude her brothers from her wedding. They're heartbroken, Sarah. Is this really what you wanted? I was at home, arranging flowers from our garden in vases for a photography test with our wedding florist. The simple domestic task felt grounding while navigating his attempt to guilt me into compliance. Where were Mom and Dad's broken hearts when you three decided I wasn't family enough for your weddings? I asked. Trimming stem ends with precise cuts. That wasn't the same thing. Stop saying that. The words came out sharper than I'd intended. Months of frustration finally breaking through my carefully maintained composure. Stop telling me it wasn't the same thing without explaining how it was different. I'm exhausted by accepting non-explanations and pretending they make sense. You're being completely unreasonable, David said. Am I? Let's discuss reasonable. Is it reasonable to expect your sister to help plan your wedding while excluding her from attending it? Because that's what Jessica did. Is it reasonable to ask your sister to coordinate vendor deliveries for a ceremony she's not invited to witness? Because that's what Marcus suggested. Is it reasonable to spend 28 years treating someone like a second-class family member and then demand first-class treatment in return? We never treated you like... Yes, you did. I arranged white roses in a crystal vase, their beauty a sharp contrast to the ugliness of our conversation. You treated me like the family's backup plan, good enough to provide free labor, not valuable enough to include in the celebrations that mattered, useful enough for cleanup and coordination, not worthy enough for the actual joy. What do you think will happen when my siblings realize that their pressure tactics aren't working? Drop your predictions in the comments below, because they were about to discover just how far I was willing to go to protect the peace I'd fought so hard to create. The individual phone calls were just the beginning. Within a week of my siblings' failed attempts at manipulation, my parents launched a coordinated campaign that would have impressed any military strategist. My mother called twice daily, alternating between tears and anger. My father sent long emails about family loyalty and the importance of forgiveness. Extended family members began reaching out, clearly having been recruited to apply pressure from multiple angles. Your cousin Jennifer called me, Daniel mentioned one evening over dinner. She wanted to understand my perspective on the family situation. What did you tell her? That it's not my place to have a perspective on how you handle relationships with people who've spent years treating you poorly. He reached across our small dining table to squeeze my hand. But I did mention that anyone who's watched you flourish since you stopped trying to win their approval might understand why you're not eager to reinvite that toxicity into your life. The pressure campaign intensified as our wedding date approached. My mother began showing up at my workplace, creating scenes in the celebration's Ink lobby until I agreed to talk with her. My siblings started driving by our townhouse at random hours, leaving notes on our door asking for just 5 minutes to talk. The breaking point came when Marcus ambushed me in the parking garage of my office building on a Wednesday evening. I was exhausted from coordinating a 3-day pharmaceutical conference, looking forward to going home and having quiet dinner with Daniel. Instead, I found my older brother leaning against my car, his face a mask of barely controlled frustration. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, stepping into my path as I approached with my keys. "No, Marcus, we don't." I walked around him toward the driver's door. 5 minutes, just give me 5 minutes to explain." Something in his voice, a vulnerability I'd rarely heard from him, made me pause. When I turned around, he looked genuinely distressed rather than just angry or frustrated. "Fine," I said, setting down my briefcase. 5 minutes. "I don't understand how we got to this place," he began, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I remembered from childhood. "I don't understand how you can throw away our entire relationship over wedding invitations." "I didn't throw away our relationship, Marcus. You did. 3 years ago, when you decided my presence would diminish your wedding joy. I'm just finally accepting the reality you established. But we're family," he said, falling back on the refrain that had become meaningless through repetition. Are we? Because family doesn't leave family standing alone in restaurant lobbies while they celebrate at tables that mysteriously have no room for them. Family doesn't schedule their happiest moments in ways that emphasize your exclusion. Family doesn't treat you like an obligation they're trying to minimize. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him actually thinking, rather than just defending himself automatically. Maybe we handled things badly, he said finally. Maybe we made mistakes. But Sarah, this is your chance to be better than us. This is your opportunity to show us what real family looks like. I stared at him, amazed by the audacity of the request. You want me to show you what real family looks like by rewarding you for showing me what fake family looks like? You want me to demonstrate love by accepting people who have consistently demonstrated that they don't actually like me? I want you to forgive us. I have forgiven you, Marcus. Forgiving you doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It doesn't mean giving you access to hurt me again in the same ways. It means accepting that you are who you are and choosing to build my future around people who are capable of better. 2 weeks before the wedding, Jessica tried a completely different approach. She appeared on our doorstep on a Saturday morning, tears streaming down her face, looking more vulnerable than I'd seen her since we were children. Sarah, please, she sobbed when Daniel answered the door. I'm begging you, don't destroy our family over this. Daniel looked at me questioningly, and I nodded. He led her into our living room, where she collapsed onto our sofa like her legs wouldn't hold her weight anymore. I've been thinking about what you said, she began when her crying subsided enough for her to speak clearly. About how we excluded you from our celebrations. And I realize we might have hurt you more than we understood. I sat across from her, curious to see where this new strategy was leading. We did hurt you, didn't we? She continued. When we didn't invite you to our weddings, we made you feel like you didn't matter to us. It was closer to a real acknowledgement than I'd ever received from any of my siblings. But something about her phrasing bothered me. You didn't make me feel like I didn't matter, Jessica. You demonstrated that I didn't matter. There's a difference. She flinched at the correction. Okay, we demonstrated that you didn't matter to us. We were wrong. Why? I asked. Why did you decide I didn't matter enough to witness your happiness? Because, she struggled with the words, clearly uncomfortable with genuine self-reflection. Because you always questioned things. You pointed out when things weren't fair. You never just went along with family decisions without analyzing them. And there it was. The closest thing to honesty I'd ever gotten from any of them. They'd excluded me from their most important moments because I had the audacity to notice unfair treatment and the courage to mention it. They'd decided my personality was fundamentally incompatible with their comfort. So you excluded me from your weddings because I wouldn't pretend to be happy about being excluded from other things? When you put it like that, it sounds horrible. It was horrible, Jessica. You made me feel like there was something wrong with me for wanting to be treated fairly. You made me believe that expecting basic respect was the same as being difficult. She was crying again, but quieter now. I'm sorry. I'm really, truly sorry. It was the first genuine apology I'd ever received from any of my siblings. It meant something, but not enough to change my decision. I appreciate that apology, I said carefully. But Jessica, you didn't come here to make amends. You came here to try to get yourself invited to my wedding. This isn't about acknowledging the harm you caused. This is about wanting something from me. Can it be both? Not really. If you were truly sorry for the pain you caused, you'd respect my decision to protect myself from experiencing it again. You'd understand that actions have consequences, even when family members are the ones taking the actions. 1 week before our wedding, my parents demanded what they called a final family meeting. All 5 of us, they insisted. Time to resolve this situation once and for all before it permanently damaged our family relationships. I almost declined. Daniel encouraged me to go, suggesting that maybe direct confrontation would finally lead to the honest conversation that had been avoided for years. You've been managing this through phone calls and doorstep conversations, he pointed out. Maybe it's time to have the discussion that actually addresses everything at once. We met at my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon that should have been spent on final wedding preparations. The living room felt smaller with all 5 of us in it, tension thick enough to disrupt normal breathing patterns. I sat in the chair I'd claimed as mine during childhood, while my siblings arranged themselves on the sofa like a united front. Sarah, my father began, using his most authoritative voice. This situation has gone far enough. You're getting married next weekend and your brothers and sister aren't invited. That's completely unacceptable. Why is it unacceptable? I asked calmly. Because we're your family. And I'm yours. But that didn't prevent them from excluding me from their weddings. My mother sighed dramatically. Sarah, we've explained that those situations were entirely different. No, Mom. You've asserted they were different. You've never actually explained how they were different. So let's do that now. Let's have the conversation we should have had 3 years ago. I looked around the room at each of them. Someone explained to me why it was acceptable for Marcus to decide I would complicate his wedding happiness, but it's not acceptable for me to decide he would complicate mine. Silence. Someone explained why Jessica could schedule her engagement celebration on my birthday without any family objection, but my wedding planning is being treated like a family crisis. More silence. Someone explained why David could determine that I wasn't immediate enough family for his ceremony, but I'm supposed to consider him immediate enough family for mine. The quiet stretched until it became uncomfortable. They were forced to confront the logic they'd been avoiding for years. Finally, Marcus spoke. We were trying to prevent conflict. What conflict? What specific conflict were you preventing by excluding me? You always... He struggled to find words that didn't sound terrible. You always found problems with things. You questioned decisions, pointed out inconsistencies, made everything more complicated than it needed to be. And there it was. The truth they'd been dancing around for years. So you excluded me from your weddings because I have a functioning brain and the courage to use it? Because I notice unfair treatment and have the audacity to mention it? You made things difficult, Jessica added, apparently deciding honesty was their only remaining strategy. I made things honest, I corrected. I made things fair. I refused to pretend that inequitable treatment was acceptable, and that made you uncomfortable. You could never just accept things the way they were, David contributed. You always had to analyze everything, question every decision. Yes, I said simply. I questioned why I was treated differently. I analyzed patterns of exclusion and favoritism. I refused to quietly accept poor treatment. And you decided that my refusal to be a doormat made me unsuitable for your celebrations. My father cleared his throat. Regardless of what happened before, Sarah, excluding your siblings from your wedding is extreme. People will notice. People will ask questions. And there it was. The real concern. Not my feelings, not the damage to our relationships, but what other people would think. Let them ask questions. Dad, let them wonder why my siblings aren't at my wedding. Maybe some of them will figure out that there are consequences for treating people badly, even when those people are family. You cannot be serious about going through with this, my mother said, her voice rising. I have never been more serious about anything in my life. The room erupted then. Years of buried resentment spilling out in a chaotic mess of accusations, justifications, and desperate attempts at emotional manipulation. Everyone talking at once, pointing fingers, making demands. Through it all, I sat quietly, watching my family implode over the consequences of their own choices. They'd spent years teaching me that I was expendable, that my feelings were negotiable, that their comfort mattered more than my inclusion. Now they were shocked and outraged that I'd finally learned the lesson they'd worked so hard to teach me. Finally, my father raised his voice above the chaos. Enough! This is ridiculous, Sarah. You will invite your siblings to your wedding, or there will be serious consequences for this family. I looked at him. This man who had watched his other children systematically exclude me and never once intervened. This man who was now threatening me for finally standing up for myself after years of accepting their poor treatment. What consequences, Dad? You'll exclude me from family events? Already happened. You'll treat me like my feelings don't matter? Been there? You'll prioritize everyone else's comfort over my well-being? Currently experiencing that. I stood up and gathered my purse. You know what the real consequence is going to be? I'm going to have a beautiful wedding surrounded by people who actually love and value me, people who see my presence as a gift rather than a problem to be managed, and all of you are going to sit at home, finally understanding what it feels like to be on the outside of someone else's joy. The morning before my wedding, my mother made one final attempt that revealed more about their mindset than anything else had. She called while I was at the salon getting my nails done, surrounded by other brides preparing for their own celebrations. Sarah, she said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion, I need to tell you something that might help you understand why your siblings made the choices they did about their weddings. I put the phone on speaker so I could continue with my manicure appointment. I'm listening. When you were growing up, you were intense. You questioned every family decision, challenged every rule, analyzed every situation until everyone was exhausted. Your siblings learned that including you in their plans meant hours of justification and explanation for choices that should have been simple. I paused, my hand halfway to the nail polish selection. This was her big revelation? Her final trump card? Go on, I said. They started excluding you from things because it was emotionally draining to have their happiness interrogated. They wanted to enjoy their celebrations without having to defend every choice to someone who seemed determined to find problems. I set down the phone and really looked at my mother's name on the screen. This woman who had raised me, who was supposed to protect and advocate for me, was calling the day before my wedding to tell me that my siblings had been right to exclude me. "Mom," I said slowly, "do you understand what you just told me? I'm trying to help you understand their perspective. You told me that my siblings excluded me from their weddings because I asked questions and expected explanations for unfair treatment. You just confirmed that they punished me for having critical thinking skills and refusing to accept inequitable treatment without comment. You made everything difficult. I made everything fair," I interrupted. "I made everything honest. I refused to quietly accept poor treatment, and that was uncomfortable for people who preferred to avoid difficult conversations." The other customers in the salon were trying not to listen, but I could see them exchanging glances. My voice had gotten louder without me realizing it. "Sarah, you have to understand." "No, Mom, you have to understand. You just called me the day before my wedding to justify why my siblings found my basic personality traits so objectionable that they couldn't tolerate my presence at their celebrations. You called to tell me that I deserved to be excluded because I wouldn't quietly accept unfair treatment." I could hear her breathing on the other end, probably realizing her strategy had completely backfired. "Do you know what you've just confirmed for me?" I continued, my voice calmer now but absolutely certain. "That I was right to protect myself from all of you, that I was right to choose people who see my questions as engagement rather than annoyance, who see my honesty as strength rather than difficulty. That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant, Mom. And it's exactly why none of you will be at my wedding tomorrow. Because I finally learned the lesson you spent 28 years teaching me. I can't count on my family to choose me, so I better choose myself first. Sarah, please. I have to go, Mom. I have a wedding to prepare for. A wedding filled with people who love me exactly as I am. Questions, honesty, and all." After I hung up, I sat in the salon chair, feeling something I'd never experienced before. Complete clarity about my family dynamics. For years, I'd wondered if maybe I was too sensitive, too demanding, too difficult. Maybe I was creating problems where none existed. My mother had just confirmed that I'd been right all along. They hadn't excluded me because I was genuinely problematic. They'd excluded me because I had a backbone, because I stood up for myself, because I expected to be treated with basic respect and wouldn't pretend to be happy when I wasn't. They'd excluded me because I refused to be a doormat, and they found strong women inconvenient. The revelation was both painful and liberating. Painful because it confirmed that my family had systematically punished me for positive traits: independence, critical thinking, self-advocacy. Liberating because it meant the problem had never been me. The problem was their inability to handle anyone who didn't automatically acquiesce to their preferences. "Everything okay, honey?" asked Maria, the nail technician, who had been pretending not to listen to my conversation. "Everything's perfect," I said, and realized I meant it completely. Tomorrow, I was going to marry the love of my life, surrounded by people who celebrated every aspect of who I was. My family was going to learn what it felt like to be on the outside of someone else's happiness, and they were going to understand that actions have consequences. It was going to be the most beautiful day of my life. My wedding day dawned crisp and perfect, the kind of October morning that makes Chicago look like a postcard. I woke up in the bridal suite at Ravenswood Manor, surrounded by the women I'd chosen as my support system: my maid of honor Emma from college, my bridesmaids from work and various friend circles, and Daniel's sister Rebecca, who had welcomed me into their family with genuine warmth from our first meeting. "Ready for the best day of your life?" Emma asked, bringing me coffee and fresh fruit from the Manor's catering service. "I've been ready for this for months," I replied, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. The morning passed in a beautiful blur of hair and makeup, photographs in the Manor's garden, and final preparations. My dress was everything I'd dreamed of. Elegant ivory silk with delicate beading that caught the light, classic lines that would look timeless in photos years from now. As I looked in the full-length mirror, I saw a woman who had fought for her happiness and won. "You look absolutely radiant," Rebecca said, adjusting my veil with the care of someone who genuinely cared about my joy. "Daniel is going to lose his mind when he sees you. Happy tears, I hope? The happiest." An hour before the ceremony, my phone buzzed with messages I'd been expecting, but hadn't been dreading. "Marcus, it's not too late to change your mind. We're all here waiting if you decide to do the right thing. Jessica, I'm dressed and ready in case you come to your senses. David, This is your last chance to fix our family before you break it forever. I showed the messages to Emma, who rolled her eyes. Even today, they're trying to make it about them instead of celebrating you. Let them wait, I said, deleting the messages without responding. I have a wedding to attend. The ceremony was everything Daniel and I had dreamed of and more. The manor's garden was transformed into something magical. White flowers everywhere, string lights creating perfect ambiance even in daylight, chairs arranged in intimate rows that made everyone feel included in our joy. Daniel looked devastatingly handsome in his navy suit, his eyes bright with tears of pure happiness as I walked down the aisle. Our officiant, Daniel's college roommate Michael, spoke beautifully about love that sees and celebrates rather than tries to diminish or change. "Sarah," Daniel said during his vows, his voice steady despite his tears, "you taught me that love isn't about settling for someone who tolerates you. It's about finding someone who sees your strength, celebrates your authenticity, and chooses you every single day, not despite who you are, but because of who you are. I promise to stand with you, support your dreams, and create a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine admiration." My own vows were simpler but felt just as profound. "Daniel, you saw me when I couldn't see myself clearly. You valued me when I'd forgotten my own worth. You chose me when others didn't. And that choice changed everything about how I see myself and what I believe I deserve. I promise to build a life with you based on honest communication, shared values, and the kind of love that makes both people stronger." There wasn't a dry eye among our guests, people who were there because they genuinely wanted to witness our happiness, not because obligation or guilt had forced their attendance. During the reception, I was surrounded by warmth and authentic celebration. Our friends toasted our love with heartfelt speeches. Daniel's parents welcomed me formally into their family, with words that made me cry happy tears. My aunts and uncles, who had watched my struggles with my immediate family over the years, expressed their pride in the strength I'd shown and the life I'd built. "You made the right choice, sweetheart," my Aunt Linda said during dinner. "Family isn't just about shared DNA. It's about people who show up for your joy and support you through difficulties." As the evening progressed, I found quiet moments to step outside onto the manor's terrace. The view was spectacular. The garden where we'd been married now lit with candles and fairy lights, the sound of laughter and music drifting from the reception hall, the Chicago skyline twinkling in the distance. Daniel found me there as I was taking in the magnitude of what we'd created together. "Any regrets?" he asked softly, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I leaned back against his chest, feeling completely at peace with every choice I'd made. Not a single one. "Even about your family?" The question deserved an honest answer. Did I feel sad that my siblings weren't there to witness this joy? Yes, absolutely. Did I regret protecting myself from people who had repeatedly demonstrated that my presence was optional to them? Not for a second. "I spent 28 years auditioning for roles in their lives," I said quietly. "Tonight, I celebrated with people who never made me try out for their love." We stood together in comfortable silence, looking out over the celebration we'd created. Behind us, our chosen family was dancing, laughing, creating memories that would last our entire marriage. People who had shown up not because they had to, but because they wanted to share in our happiness. "Mrs. Chen," Daniel said, using my new name for the first time. "I love the sound of that," I replied, turning in his arms to kiss him. As we headed back inside to rejoin our celebration, my phone buzzed once more. A message from Jessica. "We saw photos on social media. You looked beautiful. We know we have no right to say this, but we're proud of you." I showed the message to Daniel, who raised an eyebrow. "Are you going to respond?" I looked around at our reception. Friends cleaning up cheerfully, sharing stories from the evening, planning future gatherings at our home. I looked at my new husband, this man who had seen my worth from the very beginning and never wavered in his commitment to celebrating it. I looked at the life we were building together, founded on respect, honesty, and genuine partnership. "Maybe someday," I said, putting the phone away without responding. "But not tonight. Tonight is about celebrating what we've built, not mourning what was lost." And as we rejoined our party, dancing to songs chosen because we loved them, rather than because they would make other people comfortable, I knew I'd made every decision correctly. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is knowing when to stop trying to earn what should be freely given. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose people who choose you back, consistently and joyfully. 6 months after our wedding, I received a letter that would test everything I thought I'd resolved about my family situation. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered to our home in a cream envelope with my mother's careful handwriting. Inside was a 5-page letter that began with the words I'd waited years to read. Dear Sarah, I've been thinking about your wedding day and what it meant that we weren't there. For the first time, I tried to imagine how it must have felt for you to be excluded from Marcus's wedding, then Jessica's, then David's. The pain must have been enormous, and I failed you by not recognizing that at the time. I sat at our kitchen table, Daniel making dinner nearby, and read words I'd never expected to see from my mother. She detailed memories I'd forgotten, times when I'd been overlooked, dismissed, or excluded while my siblings were celebrated. She acknowledged patterns I'd pointed out for years that she'd previously denied or minimized. Your father and I raised 4 children, but we somehow convinced ourselves we only needed to truly see 3 of them. We taught your siblings that your needs were less important, your feelings less valid, your presence less essential. We created a family system that punished you for having a backbone and rewarded them for maintaining the status quo that benefited them. The letter went on to detail specific instances: the birthday parties where my preferences were ignored, the family photos I'd been cropped out of, the college conversations where my achievements were downplayed while my siblings' lesser accomplishments were celebrated. Things I'd remembered but convinced myself I'd been too sensitive about. I understand now why you didn't invite us to your wedding. You applied the exact same logic we had modeled for years. If someone's presence is considered optional for your joy, then your presence can be optional for theirs. You learned exclusion from us, and we have no standing to complain when you finally became proficient at it. Daniel noticed me crying and sat down beside me. Everything okay? I handed him the letter to read while I composed myself. After 3 years of non-apologies and justifications, my mother was finally acknowledging the reality I'd lived through. The letter continued with specific apologies to each instance of unfair treatment, and then moved to what surprised me most. Your siblings have been going through their own reckonings since your wedding. Marcus told me that he's realized he's never actually known who you are as a person. He only knew you as the sister who made him uncomfortable by pointing out family dysfunction. Jessica admitted that she scheduled her engagement party on your birthday specifically to assert dominance, and she's horrified by her own behavior. David said that watching your wedding photos made him realize he'd never seen you truly happy before, and it broke his heart to understand his role in that. I looked up at Daniel, who was reading with raised eyebrows. This is quite different from their previous approach, he observed. I'm not writing this letter to ask for forgiveness or to request inclusion in your life, my mother continued. I'm writing to acknowledge that we failed you systematically and repeatedly. You deserved better from all of us, and I'm proud of you for refusing to accept less than you were worth. The letter ended with something I'd never expected. We would like to establish a different kind of relationship with you, one based on earning your trust rather than demanding your compliance. If you're willing, we'd like to start over and learn who you actually are rather than who we assumed you should be. If you're not willing, we understand that too. We forfeited our right to automatic inclusion in your life, and we respect whatever boundaries you need to maintain. I finished reading and sat quietly for several minutes, processing emotions I hadn't expected to feel. Relief that my experiences were finally being validated. Sadness for the years of conflict that could have been avoided. Uncertainty about whether people could actually change fundamental patterns this late in life. What are you thinking? Daniel asked gently. I'm thinking about the difference between apologizing for getting caught and apologizing for the actual harm caused, I said slowly. This feels like the latter, which is new. Over the following weeks, my siblings began reaching out individually with their own letters and calls. Not demands for forgiveness or access to my life, but acknowledgments of specific ways they'd hurt me, and genuine questions about who I'd become in the years since I'd stopped trying to fit into their narrow definitions of acceptable. Marcus asked about my work. Really asked, wanting to understand what I did and why it mattered to me. Jessica inquired about my relationship with Daniel's family, seeming genuinely curious about what healthy family dynamics looked like. David wondered about my hobbies, my goals, my opinions on everything from politics to music, as if he was meeting me for the first time. The conversations were tentative, sometimes awkward, but they felt authentic in ways our family interactions never had before. They were learning to relate to me as an individual, rather than as a problem to be managed or a role to be filled. I keep waiting for them to revert to their old patterns, I told Daniel after a surprisingly pleasant phone call with Jessica, where she'd asked for my opinion on a work situation and actually listened to my response. Maybe they will, he said. People don't usually change this dramatically overnight, but maybe the shock of completely losing access to you forced them to examine their behavior in ways they'd never had to before. 6 months after the letter, my parents asked if they could visit Chicago to see our home and take us to dinner. Not to demand inclusion in family events, not to guilt me about missed holidays, but simply to spend time with me and Daniel as adults who were interested in getting to know each other better. The visit was pleasant. They admired our garden, asked thoughtful questions about our renovations, and listened with apparent genuine interest as I described recent projects at work. They treated Daniel with the respect and warmth they should have shown from the beginning, acknowledging his importance in my life and happiness. Most surprisingly, they didn't mention my siblings once during the entire weekend. They focused entirely on building a relationship with me, on understanding who I'd become, on demonstrating through actions that they valued my presence in their lives. "I never thought I'd see your parents act like they actually like you," Daniel observed after they left for the airport. "I never thought they actually did like me," I admitted. "I thought they just felt obligated to tolerate me because I was related to them." A year after my wedding, Marcus asked if Daniel and I would like to join him and Victoria for dinner sometime. Not a family gathering, not a holiday obligation, but a social invitation between couples who might enjoy each other's company. Jessica suggested we all meet at a cooking class she'd found, something fun and low pressure where we could interact as adults with shared interests, rather than people trapped in dysfunctional family roles. These interactions felt completely different from our previous family dynamic. No one was trying to manage my reactions or minimize my presence. They seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts, my experiences, my relationship with Daniel. They treated me like someone they actually wanted to spend time with, rather than someone they felt obligated to include. The change wasn't perfect or complete. There were still moments of awkwardness, times when old patterns threatened to resurface. But there was something fundamentally different about how they approached relationships with me now, with curiosity rather than judgment, with respect rather than condescension. "Do you think this would have happened if you hadn't excluded them from the wedding?" Daniel asked one evening after a surprisingly enjoyable double date with Marcus and Victoria. I considered the question seriously. "No, I don't think so. I think they needed to experience the consequences of their choices before they could understand the impact they'd had on me. They needed to lose access to me completely before they could appreciate what they'd been taking for granted." 2 years post-wedding, our family relationships were still evolving, still fragile in some ways, but built on a foundation of mutual respect that had never existed before. My siblings had learned to see me as an individual with value rather than a problem to be managed. My parents had learned to appreciate qualities they'd once tried to suppress. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is enforce consequences for poor treatment, even when those consequences are painful for everyone involved. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about finding the courage to value yourself enough to demand better treatment from others. Remember, family isn't just about who you're related to. It's about who shows up for your happiness consistently and without reservation. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give people is the opportunity to miss you enough to change how they treat you. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you teach people how to treat you by what you're willing to accept. Choose wisely.